Good afternoon, Judith Nee.
Good to see you. Thank you.
So nice to see you. So good to see an old friend. I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of the Veteran Feminists of America Oral History Project. Can't tell you how much I appreciate your participation. Great.
Sure.
And what great work you did. So we're going to start with just your origin, your literal origins. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
I was born and raised in Philadelphia. Religiously, was born Jewish, but I've never been religiously Jewish. Lots of people, including me, for many years of their lives were what is called high holiday Jews. You only, go to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I'm now not even that. I call myself a bagels and lox Jew. I am a cultural Jew. So that's that background.
Okay. How many kids in your family?
My brother and me.
Okay.
My parents had 2 gay kids because my brother
Interesting. Okay.
was gay and I'm lesbian. So
Interesting. Okay. And what did your folks do for a living?
My mother was very proud of the fact that she was the first person in her family to graduate from high school. Mm-hmm. She got a job as an executive secretary, and she did that for many, many years. My father owned a series of small grocery butcher stores, little places, primarily in black neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And my father was a terrible businessman. A kid would come in with a quarter to get a loaf of bread. The kid would leave with the quarter and the loaf of bread and $5 for a pair of shoes. So my father's business went bankrupt pretty reliably every 2 years. The interesting thing, though, about that was that I grew up the first 6 years of my life. My brother and I were the only white kids in the neighborhood. So all of my imprinting was in that kind of thing. And when I first moved to D.C., and I was first in upper northwest D.C., I was antsy. I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized there are no black people. So that had a lot to do with my start of being involved in movements, civil rights movements, and gay rights, women's rights.
Yeah. What about education?
In Philadelphia at the time, I don't know if they still do this, if you graduated first in your class, you got a full paid scholarship to any of the 5 colleges in Philly. University of Pennsylvania, Temple, Drexel, St. Joe's, and Villanova. I picked the University of Pennsylvania.
So you were obviously first in your class.
I was.
Okay.
Although my parents, I remember when I was like a junior in high school, they called my parents in to talk, and the guidance counselor said, well, what are you thinking of for college for her? And my mother said, well, we really hadn't thought about it. She said, she's first in her class, start thinking about it.
Good for her.
So I actually did something very stupid at first because I could have, it was full tuition, room, and board. And I decided for some reason to stay at home. And I realized very quickly, this is not college, this is high school again. So for the rest of my years, I did live on campus. I was interesting because there were sororities and fraternities, and people said, rush, you'll get to meet people and all, so I did. Well, I wound up with the Smart Girls sorority.
Okay.
In fact, one of the women that I lived with in the sorority house years later became the dean of the University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, fun. Yeah.
So that was, I was an English major, graduated in '68, which is probably about the last time you could graduate with a liberal arts degree and find a job.
Interesting.
So that was that.
Excellent. So then what kind of work did you get involved in?
Well, my very first job, I worked for Prudential Insurance Company, short time. I was a group insurance contract writer. And I quickly figured out, I don't think so.
Right.
So what I did was I interviewed with the Bell system, New Jersey Bell at the time, because I was living in New Jersey. After I graduated college, my husband and I moved to New Jersey. He was in law school. In retrospect, I should have put me through law school. Instead of him, I would have been a much better lawyer. I found out that they were interviewing, they had a job open for somebody to be an employment interviewer. I thought, good, I'll get paid for talking. So that's what I did. I went to work for New Jersey Bell as in the office that hired operators and clerks and service representatives. There was a separate office that hired linemen and installers, and the men who did that got paid more than those of us
Right.
who hired the women jobs.
So gender segregated hiring.
Yes, yes, gender. One of the things that I like telling people about when I first got involved with the women's movement is we were the people who got rid of help wanted male, help wanted female. I started with New Jersey Bell. All of my work in the Bell system was in what I call the soft side of the business. I was never in any kind of a technical job. I was in human resources, where largely what I did there was manage affirmative action programs.
Okay. Can we go back and pick up from this period of time? You talked about the consciousness of growing up in a black neighborhood. When did movements come into your life?
Really, it was with Now.
Okay.
I attended my very first Now chapter meeting in the first week of 1973.
Okay.
And then the women's movement took over my life. But it was the women's movement that, because of the coalition work that we did, that got me involved in the civil rights movement.
Okay.
And then when I realized at age 30, I was a slow learner, I realized at age 30 that I was a lesbian. And so it also led me into lesbian rights work.
Right.
But really it was, Now was where it started.
Okay.
I had gotten, I was married, I had gotten divorced, and my life, well, was just sort of the same as it had been. There was, so for 1973, I made a series of New Year's resolutions, which was not my habit normally.
Okay.
I decided that I was going to go join a gym. I was going to go back and get a master's degree. I was going to join a local political organization. There were like a whole series of things. I went to my first Now chapter meeting, which was Essex County Now in New Jersey, first week of January. I never did any of those other things. It now took over my life.
Right.
And the way, I'm not sure exactly how chapters function now, but if you were interested and good, by the end of the first year, I was a chapter officer.
Right.
And then shortly after that, I was elected to the what we used to call state coordinator.
Okay.
Now they're called state presidents, but we were in that sort of mushy
right.
time.
Can you tell me what were the major issues when you joined Essex County now? What were the major issues that those folks were dealing with that caught your attention, particularly?
The thing that was most everybody involved in was the abortion issue, reproductive rights and abortion. Now, my first chapter meeting was the first week of January 1973. The Roe v. Wade decision came down about 3 weeks after that.
Right.
Like naive people, we thought, well, this has largely solved that issue.
Right.
But as somebody once said to me, when you have states being able to each make their own regulations about an issue like abortion, it's sort of the equivalent of freeing the slaves one plantation at a time, because we have still, all these years later, we're still fighting all of the battles because of the restrictions in states. And in fact, just very recently, there was a court case that decided that in Virginia, yeah, you could say you have to have a vaginal ultrasound before you have an abortion.
Right.
And you need to make 2 trips. You need to make 1 trip to have that, and then there's a waiting period,
Right.
and then eventually you get.
Right.
So we were naive enough at that time
And that's
to
46 years ago.
yeah, exactly. And it's worse now in many ways. I don't need to tell you, there are states that there's 1 abortion clinic, if you're lucky. If not, you have to travel to somewhere. There are parental consent laws. There are these vaginal ultrasounds and waiting periods. Any way that they could restrict, they have. And this Supreme Court is worrisome.
Right. So it was quite an optimistic period then in 1973 when you joined the chapter. 3 weeks later, a major victory.
Yeah.
What else was intriguing to you? What other issues were intriguing to you at that time?
Equal pay. I remember during the time when I was the state coordinator in New Jersey, we did this action all across the state at multiple Sears stores because Sears discriminated against women and people of color in hiring and in credit. So we had big demonstrations at about 8 different Sears stores throughout the state. We got absolutely no press
Really?
at all because the editorial influenced what they did.
Okay.
And so that was a shock to me that we put in all this work and we just got absolutely no media about
Amazing.
it at all.
Amazing.
Equal pay, very much.
Right.
And I actually had a personal involvement in that because there was a consent decree with the EEOC, 6-year consent decree with the Bell system,
Right.
basically because they had discriminated against women and people of color.
Right.
We called them minorities then. It's driving a lot of people crazy that they're not minorities
Right.
anymore.
Right.
So when I was hired, they had a management development program, but no women were in it at all.
At the Bell system in New Jersey.
Yes.
Correct.
Well, in the country.
All of it. All of it. Okay.
And so one of the things that the consent decree required was that they give women like me who had never been considered for the management development program, that they give us the opportunity to qualify for it. And we had to be assessed, tests, all sorts of inbox exercises. And the interesting thing for me was what they thought was a flaw, literally, thought was a flaw was they said she cares more about the work she does than the level that she does it at. They thought that was a criticism. I thought it was a compliment, frankly.
Right.
It impacted me personally because I was considered for that program. I thought, and I'm sort of jumping around, but I knew that I was a lesbian. I was not out at work.
Right.
It was the only place that I was in my life that I was not out because I didn't think it was safe.
Yes.
But I said, when I realized they're not going to promote me again, I'm going to come out at work. And there were some people in, when would this be? Early 90s, I guess, 1990s, who were wanting to start a gay lesbian employee group.
Right.
I could have participated in that without coming out, but I knew I would be more effective if I did. So I came out at work, and I love telling this story. My boss was one of the first people I came out to. He's sitting across the desk from me, and when I tell him this, he says, "Oh, I'm so honored you're sharing this information with me." He got up, came around, gave me a great big hug.
Really?
Somebody else, one of my coworkers in the department, with whom I was not particularly close, was angry with me. "Why didn't you tell me this before?"
Oh.
But my favorite reaction was a person who I was very friendly with, but had not had that conversation with yet about coming out. And she said to me, "Tell me something I don't know."
Love it.
So it was like,
I guess it was time.
I'm honored. I'm angry. Tell me something I don't. It was a wonderful
Amazing.
array of reactions.
So that's the 90s. Let's go back to the 70s a little bit.
Okay.
So we can take our through your now years.
Jump all over the
So
place.
72, we haven't mentioned it yet, but 72 I think was the AT&T consent decree was arrived at somehow in the early 70s. And so being in the Bell system, you experienced the impact of a federal decision like that on your own company. Can you talk about that in any other ways that had an impact at that early period, or was there no impact as far as you could tell?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I was, I think, always a feminist, but I didn't know, frankly, I didn't know the word for it.
Right. So what was you were not rising in the corporation because you weren't considered for some of the, but
I was, but there
Okay.
was a ceiling.
Got it. Okay, so you had
I
promotions,
was
but not.
what's called a second level manager.
Right, and breaking into.
Originally first level, then promoted to second level.
Okay.
The first really significant level of management was the third level,
Right,
director level.
Right.
Directors, for example, were eligible for the employee stock option program. If you were anything else, you weren't. The hardest thing for me in the 30 years that I worked for the Bell system was that there were about 6 strikes during that time. I, because I was management,
Right.
I had to be operator duty
Right.
for 12 hours a day, 6
Right.
days a week.
Right.
I had to cross a picket line. It was so painful to me. But if I had not done that,
Right.
they would have fired me.
Right.
Because I'm management, that's
Right.
part of
And
the...
you didn't have the union to protect you,
Right.
ironically.
It's interesting because my closest friend from college wound up moving years after I moved to the DC area. She wound up moving here. Her second husband is a Republican, very conservative. She's gotten more and more conservative over the years of her marriage. the thing that drives me the craziest about them is not that they vote for Republicans, they're anti-union. And I said to them, do you not understand that every benefit you had while you were working and every benefit that you have as a retiree, you have that because unions fought for them? And once they fought for them and contractually it changed the way that they treated non-management. I hate something that's defined by what it isn't, but that's what we call them, non-management. The fact that they were anti-union, it was just very critical for me. And I very rarely, I still see her. I won't spend time with him.
Yeah. So you joined in 73, and then you quickly, as you said, became the state director. Could you describe that and what that involved, and what things happened as a result of being the state director?
I was the state coordinator from 1974 to 76, basically. My skills are largely organizational and administrative. I was a damn good state coordinator, state president. Things happened when they were supposed to. If we were supposed to be having a conference and we were supposed to ask chapters to bid, and things, when I was state coordinator, things worked the way they were supposed to, administratively.
Do you remember how many chapters there were in New Jersey at that time, roughly?
There were close to 20.
Okay.
So anyway, that was my skills. I'm not Ellie Smeal. I'm not the most passionate of speakers. I'm not the most strategic of planners. My skills were administrative.
Good.
But I was darn good at it.
Good.
And from that standpoint, and that carried on when I became the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director.
That was your next.
Which, after I was.
You did have rapid increase in your responsibilities within now, if not within AT&T, right?
Exactly.
So, okay, so now you're the regional
so
director.
So now I'm the regional director, and
how big is the region?
It was the 7-state region.
Okay.
We were very fortunate as a region because we could, some regions, people were hours and hours and hours away from each other. You needed to take a train or a plane to get to meetings.
Right.
With our 7 states, well, 6 states and the District of Columbia, we could have real regional meetings, and we did 3-4 times a year.
Right.
The poor people from West Virginia had to be in a
come
car
away.
forever to get there.
Right.
But ours was a very active region because of we had the good fortune of our geography.
So what did you do?
From an administrative standpoint, the regions were elected the members of the board.
Okay.
The regional director of a region was on the board, but also there would be 3 other people, and they were elected at regional conferences.
Okay.
And so that was one very important part of what they did. We did actions, again, because we were geographically able to.
Right.
One of the things that we did was a action where we demonstrated at the Vatican Embassy. I didn't even know there was such a thing, the Vatican Embassy, because they were having a great impact on abortion, but also gay rights. I mean, they're very conservative about everything. So we had a demonstration there, and that was very successful.
In Washington, D.C.
Yes, in D.C.
But all the people came from all the regions.
Yes.
And that's a period when the ERA was in the ratification stages. Did the Mid-Atlantic region play any role in that?
we were fortunate that our states pretty much ratified.
Not West Virginia.
So where we got very involved was when it was the Equal Rights Amendment was one of the only few, there may have been one or two others, where there was a time limit
Right,
on it.
right.
So we got to the point where it was going to be, the time was expiring. So what we as an organization nationally did is tried to do two things. One, we wanted to extend the deadline.
Right.
Two, there were about 5 states who had ratified, but then got taken over by right-wing Republicans and who voted to rescind their ratification. There's nothing in the Constitution about rescission. So when we were lobbying Congress, there was really 2 things that we were looking at. We were wanting the deadline extended, and we wanted rescissions not to count. That is actually what brought me, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead on you, that's what brought me from New Jersey to DC. There was a very dear friend of mine who was a programmer at IBM, and she convinced them to give her a personal leave of absence for a year so that she could come and overhaul our membership system, which desperately needed that.
At the national office.
At the national office.
Okay.
She was in California, but she moved to DC. And I thought, wow, I wonder if I can get AT&T to do that. By then, I was no longer working for New Jersey Bell. I had been transferred to AT&T in New Jersey.
Right. Did the breakup of the Bells affect your job at all?
Well, it affected everybody's job
Right.
in that the Bell system, the phone companies were what was known as a regulated rate of return utility. That meant the PUC set the Public Utilities Commission in each state set the rates. The company was guaranteed a profit. It
Right.
was their rate of return was guaranteed.
Right.
When the Bell system was split up into AT&T and then the regional companies, each regional company was a number of states that were in a region. So when that happened, when they were a regulated rate of return utility, they cared about customers, they cared about employees. When they were, and there was the only stock that there was AT&T. When they split us up and the regional companies and organizations were formed, and ours was Mid-Atlantic, and it was pretty much the same states
As your original.
right,
Right.
as the region. So when the divestiture, that's what it was called, of the system, it only took them about 48 hours. The only thing they now cared about, because each of these regional companies issued stock, the only thing they cared about was the stock price.
Right.
And it then became a very toxic corporate environment, which it had not been
Okay.
before. So it affected me, it affected everyone,
Right.
really.
Right.
I decided that I wanted to try and see if AT&T would do the same thing that they had done for my friend and give me a personal leave of absence. They would not be paying my salary, but I would have a guarantee that, yes, there will be a job for you
Right.
at the end of this year's personal leave of absence. I was trying to be smart, and I was. I wrote a letter for Ellie Smeal, the president of NOW, to send to my vice president of human resources at AT&T. And I was trying to be clever. I wanted to give them something to turn down so they would give me what I wanted.
Okay.
there's something called an executive loan. It's not just something that the phone companies did, all sorts of corporations. They would loan an executive to some sort of organization. They would pay that person's salary. They were in effect making a donation by paying the person's salary, but the person was doing work. What kinds of organizations? The United Way, the National Association of Manufacturers, not a political organization like now. So I thought, there's no way that they're going to give me an executive loan, but what the letter says is, you have the perfect person on your staff. She's a member of our board of directors. She has the skills that we're looking for right now. She's a very good writer. And it would be wonderful if you could give her an executive loan to come and work for the National Organization for Women. If you can't do that, could you please at least give her a year's leave, personal leave of absence, where you would not be paying her salary the way you would for a loaned executive, but she would have a guarantee of a job back. So off this letter goes. What I had not, and you would think I would have really thought about this, because what was I working on at AT&T? Affirmative action. The consent decree was about to expire. It was like within a month of expiring when this letter hits. And what I'm imagining happened, I wasn't a fly on the wall in the room, is somebody said, the consent decree is expiring now, and the NAACP and they're going to be looking, just making sure that we don't backslide in any way. They may put a darn picket line up here if we say no to this. Give her the executive loan. So that's what happened. I was smart enough to say, here's something you can turn down. What I didn't realize, I wasn't as smart as it turned out, was that the expiration of the consent decree was going to have that kind of impact.
So they said yes.
They said yes. I remember calling Ellie and saying, Ellie, you're not going to believe, they said yes to the executive loan. You've got me for a year. You don't have to pay me at all. I was earning more than the now officers were, because we were just starting to have salaried. And so whatever they were, I was earning a corporate salary. I was earning $80,000 or something.
Right, nice.
So I was making. The other thing, a friend of mine who was on the board of directors and Ellie hired to come and work, because she was working for Now and Now was paying her salary, she had to give up her board seat because it would have been a conflict of interest. You can't be on the board that is setting your salary. So she had to resign. Because they Now was not paying my salary, AT&T was, I kept my board seat. Amazing. So, I mean, it was, if I had tried to plan this, but it was just a marvelous situation. There was a guy, his name was Bill Sharwell. He was a vice president at AT&T. He had recently been added to the Now Legal Defense and Education Fund board, which was our sister organization. Why was he put on that board? Because he's a corporate vice president fundraising. That was the primary reason. I did not know this man, but he worked in the same building that I did for AT&T in New Jersey, in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. So I got in touch with him. I said, you don't know me, but I know that you've, now are on the Now LDEF board. I thought you would like to know that I'm going to be working for Now for a year on an executive loan from AT&T. And so I just got in touch. He gets back in touch. He said, yeah, let's get together, and we did. Well, he then becomes my biggest booster
Great.
in the world. At the end of the 1 year executive loan, he didn't talk to me about this. He went to my vice president at AT&T, who was not happy about this whole thing to begin with.
Right.
I mean, not happy in the way that it was up to him whether or not they would pay my moving expenses. They did not, because he wasn't going to do anything to make this easier or better
Right. Got it.
for me. Bill Sharwell gets in touch with this guy at the end of the year, and he said, I've never seen anybody so happy doing what she's doing in my life. Give her another year. And they did.
Oh my goodness.
So for 2 years, they're paying my salary. I'm working
Right.
for now, and we'll talk about what I did
Right.
during that time. At the end of the second year, I figured I better get myself back there, or there's not going to be a job there.
Right.
But I did not want to. The only place that was obligated to take me back was New Jersey Bell. I did not want to go back to New Jersey because I was living in D.C., where the heart of politics for the nation is. I wanted to be here and to be able to continue, doing that kind of work. So again, Bill Sharwell calls the vice president of public relations at C&P Telephone in D.C. And said, I have this person, she's wonderful, and can you make a job for her here in D.C.? And they did.
Wonderful.
They kicked somebody out of a job, actually. She went to another job
Right,
as an
right.
equally good or better job,
Right.
but they made a job
for you.
for me. So Bill Sharwell was the gift that kept on giving.
Yeah. Wonderful. Nice.
And he's no longer with us now.
Right.
But
We remember him fondly.
yes,
Right.
yes. Well, he was, for an AT vice president, he was pretty feminist.
Yeah. Good for him.
I moved here to DC in 1979.
Okay.
So the big thing that we were doing was trying to get the extension
Okay.
of the Equal Rights Amendment
Right.
timeline, and also to see that, rescissions would not be counted.
Right.
In doing that, we were lobbying our members all across the country. I mean, that's part of the wonderful strength of now, is that we did have a real grassroots organization. So if the national organization adopted a certain policy, you could work on that in your state or in your region. And so a lot of our members were lobbying in their home offices, or if they came to DC in their office on the Hill,
Right.
were lobbying their people to support the extension, but to say no, rescission
Right.
should not count. I was the person who kept the vote count.
Okay.
All of the people in the States, when they lobbied somebody, and they would get in touch with me,
Okay.
phone, writing, whatever, saying, I talked to, Bill Smith. He's a good on extension, but he also is going to say yes, rescission. So there were 435 members of the
Yes,
House and
yes.
100 members of the Senate
Right.
who were getting lobbied. All of that info was coming in to me, and I would maintain that vote count, and we would meet every week or two, whatever, and I would give them the updated
Right.
thing.
Right.
The funny thing that happened regarding that, Elizabeth Holtzman was the sponsor, the main sponsor in the House. And so she was keeping the vote count for the legislators.
Right.
The very first meeting, when we get together to compare what she knows in her vote count versus what we know
Right.
in our vote count, all of my records, all vote count things, were by state, by congressional district,
Right.
because that's how you lobby. You
Right,
lobby
right, right,
your
right,
your
right,
person.
Right.
Elizabeth Holtzman comes in to this meeting, and her vote count is organized alphabetically.
Oh,
What are we going to do? Lobby the M's
yeah.
or the P's? So that it was just hysterical. I got her to change her
Okay.
vote
Good.
count.
Good.
So that was one thing I was working on. Also, our attorney, a guy named Tom Hart, at the time, he was writing our legal briefs, amicus briefs that were being provided to Congress of what our organization thought should happen and why, and everything. So Tom Hart wrote the amicus brief from a legal standpoint. My job was to read what he wrote and make sure that in any legal argument he was making, he was not saying something that was not in keeping with our feminist philosophy.
Okay. All right.
So he was the law guy.
yeah.
I was the feminist. So before it ever got to Ellie Smeal, who would approve it, yes, you or no, make these changes, whatever, I was the person working with the lawyer on that.
All right. Good.
Which
work.
is why part of why I say I should have put myself through law school.
Yeah.
Um,
You sort of did that at now.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So I did that also. I also ordered all of the kinds of ERA supplies, rounds, ERA, buttons, buttons that said 59 cents because that's what women were earning. It's better now. It's still not equal.
No,
but
right.
59-cent buttons, brochures about how the ERA would impact insurance, how it would impact pay, how it would,
Right.
So that was when Ellie says in the letter she has the skills we want. She meant I'm a writer.
Right.
So I wrote
good.
all of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Good.
So primarily the work that I did was regarding the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, because I was working in the Now Action Center,
Right.
I got involved in all sorts of other things. But my primary responsibilities had to do with that ERA vote count, ERA amicus briefs, and ERA supplies of various kinds.
And in the same period, you served on the board. Can you tell us about your board experience?
Yeah. I joined the board in 1977. Initially, board terms were 2 years. Because we were in the middle of this ERA thing, we decided we do not want to change leadership while we're doing this. We don't want Ellie Smeal to time out of her 4-year term as president. We don't want Judith and other board members timing out of their 2-year terms.
Right.
So they wound up, we passed bylaws changes because that's how we had to do it. You can violate your own bylaws.
Right.
We passed changes so that instead of a 2-year term, it was a 3-year term, and then we did that again. So I wound up on the board for 6 or 7 years because of those extensions.
Right.
I was put on the budget committee, and Ellie realized after a while that I didn't know the difference between a profit and loss statement and any other piece of paper that had numbers on it.
Okay. Right.
So she said, I don't think this is your strong suit. How about you become the bylaws chair? Well, administrative bylaws, all right, that is up my alley.
Up your alley, right.
I wound up being the bylaws chair for about 20 years.
Wow.
And somebody at one point in time dubbed me the bylaws queen. And if I ever remember who that is, I will hunt them down. But I was the bylaws queen. Ask the bylaws queen; she'll know. And in fact, even after when I retired from the Bell system, I thought, well, I'm retired too. as the bylaws chair. I've been doing it for over 20 years. But even after I did that, and even after I was no longer working in the NOW office, I was no longer on the board, I was no longer the bylaws chair, people would call me from all over the country. Officers in the NOW office would call me, people in states, whatever. And I had the ability to issue rulings, in effect. But once I had resigned as the bylaws chair, I would still get these calls. And so what I did for a good 10, 15 years at least, was I would say, okay, look, I will research it. I'll tell you what I think our bylaws and our parliamentary authority, the Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. I will do all of that. I will tell you what I think the answer is. But I am no longer the bylaws chair. Whatever I say has absolutely no weight of a ruling or anything. What you need to do, because I was pretty well known as an authority. I said, if you're going to use my name and say, this is what Judith Nee, I was Judy Nee then, this is what Judy Nee says, you have to say to them what I have just said to you. She is no longer the bylaws chair. She's very happy to give us counsel, but we have to understand this is not any kind of an official ruling. This is just what I think. So that went on for a long time. So again, I was not the speaker, the strategizer. I was the organizational administrative.
Absolutely,
person.
absolutely. Are there any other issues or insights that you want to talk about in that period?
Well, as I said, lesbian rights became something that was very important to me. And one thing I remember that I felt very good about was that the whole transgender issue started emerging. And some people felt, well, that's not lesbian rights, but that was our issue too. It should be. I mean, women, etc. So I remember I think it was in Texas somewhere. There was a national conference at which I was one of the people who was very much lobbying for us to pass a resolution that we do support transgender rights. And that is part of the whole picture. So I felt, that was an important thing to me.
Were there things that disappointed you? And then I'll ask you what you think your greatest achievements were within the women's movement. But if you want to talk about anything.
Not so much disappointment as that NOW had internal political issues, as most organizations do. You're concentrating on the changes you want to make in the world, but meanwhile, within your organization, sometimes things got a little heated. There was a period of time when Ellie and also Karen DeCrow, who then became the president of NOW after Wilma Scott Heide, when we were having it was essentially the coasts, the West Coast and the East Coast, we were sort of had our view of things, but then there was the rest of the country, the Midwest. And the national office at that time was in Chicago. It was not in D.C. It was when Ellie was elected to her first term as president that we established the NOW office to be in D.C. instead, because that's the site, of politics, in the country. But we were having a pretty heated battle internally. And what the the name of the group that Ellie and Karen and I and lots of other people were in was called the Majority Caucus, because we felt that we really were the majority of, but we weren't, having as much impact as we wanted to. One thing that we did was we escrowed our dues. We did not want to be sending to the national office in Chicago all of our dues money for our chapters and our states and regions, going to them when we did not think that the office was doing what it should be doing. So we didn't withhold our dues, we legally put them in escrow so that, yes, this is not our money, this is now's money. And in individual states, organizations decided whether or not they wanted to do that. I was the state coordinator, president of Now New Jersey at the time. Our board and our board met 4 or 5 times a year. At one of the board meetings, there was the subject of, shall New Jersey escrow our dues and not send them, put them aside. So there was a motion that we do that. There was a lot of debate. We get to the point of voting on it, and the vote is tied.
Oh my God.
But being the bylaws chair, there were things that I was very aware of. The chair has the option, if she or he wishes to exercise it, to break a tie or make a tie. If it's 19, to 20, you could be the 20th vote to make it a tie. Or if it was 20 to 20, you could vote, yes or no to make it what the decision will be. This was just, I didn't think about this ahead of time. I did not know that it was going to be a tie vote. There are people in New Jersey who are very active in the Majority Caucus. And when the vote was tied, I exercised, actually, I think I got a little wrong. I think it was 19 to 20 or something.
Okay.
I exercised my option as the chair to vote with the 19 and to make it a tie. Once it's a tie, it dies for lack of a majority.
You knew
So
that, obviously.
here I am, Little Miss Majority Caucus, and I vote to make it a tie so that we do not escrow our dues. My friends in the Majority Caucus were furious with me, but my job was being the state president of Now New Jersey, not being a Majority Caucus member.
Interesting.
I felt that it would be wrong, just because the vote could have gone the other way. For it to be that divisive, I thought it will tear our state apart if we do this. And so my decision was, make it a tie so it dies for lack of a majority, and we're not in a situation where half the state is happy we're escrowing our dues and half the state is furious that we are. So I chose to have my friends be furious at me rather than do what was really my job, which was to be the state president.
Okay, that's wonderful.
So
description, really.
That was one of my proudest moments, actually.
Excellent.
Even though it enraged my friends. I knew I had done
what you felt
the right thing.
And good for you.
That happened later, too, with the board thing. There was something going on, again, internally. It doesn't matter what it was. But they did not come to me, the officers, did not come to me for my opinion on this particular subject because they knew what my political alliance was. So they went around me.
Oh.
I, at a board meeting, said, look, you need to know what's happening. This is what has happened. I believe that the officers have done something that is wrong, that they, should not have done this, and they deliberately did not consult me. So I made sort of a little bit of a public stink about it at the board meeting.
Right.
The thing, I guess, one of the things that I'm proudest about is that in all those administrative roles and as the bylaws chair, with a lot of power to
Right.
do things,
Turn a meeting, right.
I was always, even if it was, again, a thing where my ruling was not what my friends would have
Right.
wanted it to be.
Good for you.
I was, people said, she's an LA supporter, blah, blah, but she's honest. If she does something, you don't have to worry that she's doing it because she thinks it's politically advantageous to her faction. She knows she's going to tell you, even if it goes against her faction, that she will be honest. And so that reputation was very important to me.
What did the women's movement mean to you? How did it change your life and affect your life, and how has it affected your life and right up to this moment?
It totally changed my life. Like I said, I was going to go to grad school. I was going to join a gym. I was going to, join a local political. I never did any of those things because now just took over my life in a very positive way.
Right.
My friends now, scattered all across the country, are, when you work in trying to do something, the bonds that form are very strong.
Right.
So it affected, why do I live in DC? I live in DC because I moved here for 1 year to work for now.
Right.
And 46 years later, I'm still here.
Right.
So it affected really every aspect of my life. And it gave me skills, because of all the parliamentary and bylaws experience, what we're going through right now with the Republicans, and with, I don't need to tell you how totally terrible in every possible way Trump and his allies
Right.
are. And so now the subject of impeachment has come up. This just happened about a week, 10 days ago. That's why it's top of mind. I started worrying, knowing how bad Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch, was as far as the Kavanaugh hearings and everything. Anything that the majority leader of the Senate has an awful lot of power as to what comes up for a vote, what doesn't. So I began to worry about 10 days ago of, all right, let's say, it looks now the House is going to vote to impeach him. The Democrats have the vote to impeach him.
Right.
But then it goes to the Senate for a trial. What can Mitch McConnell do to protect Trump? So I started researching it. If you can use an index, you can really pretty much figure things out. I just happen to have the kind of brain that does it.
Right.
So I recently sent out an email because as I started researching it, what can McConnell do? The news was pretty good that he can't really, he does not have the power that he is exercising as Senate Majority Leader regarding this impeachment issue. Because I found out, for example, I assumed that the trial in the Senate would be presided over by the Majority Leader of the Senate,
One would.
which would be McConnell, which would give him myriad opportunities to protect Trump.
Right.
But my research indicated no. When it is the president who is being impeached, the person who presides is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, Roberts is not good on many issues of ours, Chief Justice Roberts, but he did vote. He was the deciding vote. He voted with the liberals to uphold rather than repeal the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
Right.
So I knew he would be a much more impartial chair. So that was good news.
That is good.
Also good news, once it's a 2/3 vote in the Senate to convict. But if you get that 2/3 or higher vote to convict, the president is automatically removed immediately. There is, it happens, you take the vote, you're not president anymore.
Right.
There is nothing that Mitch McConnell or William Barr or Trump could do to delay his removal.
Right.
That's good news.
That's instant.
And so there were things like that that I learned. So I sent out this email to every political person in my contacts list saying, okay, here's what I've found out, sharing that information. That came out of all those years of being the bylaws
Absolutely.
chair.
Right.
So it's, when you say how is now, and the women's movement changed my life, it has made me who I am. I would not be who I am if I had not gone to the Essex County Now chapter meeting the first week of January 1973.
Well, we're sure glad you did.
I am too. In fact, when I resigned as the bylaws chair, I told the board was, whatever I've done, all the work I've done, I have gotten more out of it than I put in it. So the whole impact on my life was just very positive. I would not be who I am if I had not ever joined Now.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Anything else you wanted to add?
And some things that were, just a lot of fun. I remember that those of us in the Mid-Atlantic region, we did a freedom train to Chicago during the whole fight about getting the extension and the rescission.
Right.
So we take this train, we get there, and there's nobody to greet us. So we got off the train, some of us, and greeted us.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. That was, there were just all sorts of things that grew those bonds and made the things happen.
Yes. Yes.
Well, there is a question about what are you currently
Yes, what
doing?
are you currently doing? Right.
I am no longer putting in the amount of hours and
Right.
time. I don't have an office, a role.
Right.
But one of the reasons that I did not want to go back to New Jersey, that I wanted to stay here, is so much in the way of political actions
Right.
that happen here.
Yes.
Marches, rallies,
Right.
conferences.
Right.
And so that is pretty much what my involvement is currently. I mean, if there's a march, if there's a rally, if there's a conference, I'm there. Am I doing the kind of intensive work that I did when I was
Right.
the president, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director, the bylaws chair? No, but it still has an impact on my life, and I hope I still have an impact on it.
Excellent.
the things, even, you know, with those internal political battles, those skills that we learned fighting each other were the skills that we took into the world to fight for the things that we wanted to change.
Right.
So even that, which was, I mean, now politics could get very heated.
Yes.
But anyway, so it was a very,
learning,
the
very much a
skills
learning.
transferred. I think of somebody like Sue Arrington,
Uh-huh.
who is a state legislator
Right.
in Indiana.
Indiana.
I think,
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah,
Indiana.
Indiana.
Those skills are
Absolutely.
skills she learned in now. And there are a number of people
Yes.
who are like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yes.
and the thing, one thing I was always very important, I think, to all of us about now, is that we were not single issue. I mean, NARAL did very good work
Right.
on abortion issues,
right.
reproductive rights issues.
Right.
But anything, whether it was reproductive rights, pay, just everything, there's nothing, transgender, lesbian rights.
Right. Right.
Now, there was no issue that impacted women that we did not see as part of our mission.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
And tried to change with the times.
Yes.
Update with the times.
But you know, it's like girls in Little League. We did that.
Totally.
I mean, we
Title IX. We made Title IX
yeah.
come alive to
Yes.
some extent.
So we've had a very great impact. I think about the suffragists. Many of them died without ever seeing women get the right to vote.
Right.
We have seen real change
We have.
because of the work we've done.
Well, thank you so much, Judith. Again, thank you very much for participating. And
Well, thank you for being active in the Veteran Feminists of America and doing what you do. And Mary Jean and I have not seen each other in 20 years,
at least.
and we were not in the same political faction.
Correct.
But that bond is so that it is wonderful to see you. It is wonderful to you know, revisit all the things that we did together in the organization, even when we weren't doing it together.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I thank you
I
very
agree.
much for that.
You're welcome.